What's going on, Aces people? So this is day one of an interesting thing we're doing here. So, we install these systems, we test stuff with all that, and I've been collecting information about some of the common issues that I see out in social media, and I've got a list of about 30 of the most common things over the last few years. We're going to go through the top 5 in this video. While he adjusted timing on this, but nevertheless, we want to take this document that I wrote, we're going to put it out to the public for you, the people, but we're also going to make some videos out of it, just kind of really step through and explain all the interesting things that goes on about how we're diagnosing things and whatnot. So over here at the test stand, you see Joseph, he's having a lot of fun. So anyways, Joseph's getting the timing set for me here. Are we looking good?
I'm good to go.
I love it. See what we got here. A bit of a high idle, all that stuff. You can see right here, this thing's got a high idle and a low IAC position. There's a good chance of the IAC getting zeroed out. But let's start at the very beginning here. Let's see. Top issue number 1, no RPM signal during cranking. What normally happens is I'll scroll through right here. That's right, I took notes. Taking notes is important. The normal things that I've found that actually seem to kind of plague some people is they forget to plug this in. This is the VR connection as well, so it kind of gives it a headache and a half. You can see it's been smoked once or twice, but not a big deal. We keep it out here. So let's see, wrong TAC input configuration. If you're not using a VR, you don't have this harness plugged in, you might not have the right signal. So you could be using like a coil negative and not have it hooked to the right thing. You could be using a CDI box and not having it connected correctly. So few things there about, but I would check the manual for wiring schematics about what system do you have and how should it really plug in. Let's see what we got here. Faulty distributor crank trigger. That everything that's manufactured may have an issue. You never know. But if you got it, do have it good and plugged in, it is selected correctly in the software itself, and you're not getting any RPM signal, make sure the reluctor and everything is appropriate. If you had to lock your distributor out, you could have hit a wire, you could have done something, or the terminals inside of this connector could be expanded out and not really having a great day. Let's see, confirm ignition switch. That's super valid. So if you have something like a CDI box or a Hall effect distributor, not like this magnetic one right here, this blackjack. Look, it's a Killshot too, isn't that cool? But you might not have the correct switch 12 volts to give the Hall effect distributor the correct amount of voltage when you key it on. That's a pretty common thing. Some people just hook the signal wire up and think it's just going to carry on like this one does. But also, they might not have a good switch 12 volt source for like, if you're using like a high roller ignition box or in one of the other brands. But that's kind of some of the common things that people run into is these connections and connections to the additional wires for any kind of RPM TAC signal. The next thing we run into, issue number 2, this is like the most common stuff. O2 sensor reading a false lean. So on some of these systems, what you end up with is the O2 sensor may be in a bad spot. You may have this O2 sensor right here way too close to this collector, causing excessive heat and messing with the sensor. Or you could have the setup wizard a little bit off, or the fuel pressure a little bit off, just giving way too much fuel to the system itself, just kind of flooding out or fouling up the sensor. That's the most common things, 2 top common things that I see. But also, there's a small little hidden thing in there, is we end up with system voltage. If you're trying to get the system in a closed loop to help compensate fuel, but you don't have enough voltage in the system itself, what you're going to run into is the lower the voltage, the less the performance of the O2 sensor. If it doesn't have enough voltage, it may not meet the minimum threshold for the heater sensor and heater circuit in the sensor itself to allow it to say, hey, okay, I've got enough voltage, I'm up to temperature, let's go into closed loop and do a really good job here. So that's one of the, that's more rare, but that's normally if somebody's putting like the battery like in the trunk of a car and they have the wrong size wires running up here to the ECU. Issue number 3, no fuel pump activation. So with that, we don't really see it on this one because, well, we're using a PDM. This is that new special harness that doesn't have any of the relays and fuses. But in some cases, let's see, oh, over here. You can see here on my jackpot run stand, we got fuses. So you know, if you have an issue, make sure your fuse is seated in there really well for your fuel pump. This is for the main, this one's for the fuel pump. But, you know, or you could just be missing the thing. That's even more rare than anything else, but sometimes you just end up with a bad fuse. I'll make one of my guys put this back in later. Look at that. Oh, nope, I got it. So you really want to check your connections. You could have a bad ground on your fuel pump. I got that written here, and you guys will see this document whenever I put it out public. But it's just all the normal stuff. Check your fuses, make sure your pump activation is good, make sure you've ran the setup wizard, make sure you have power to your ECU. If you're using a PDM, make sure the fuses are good and all the power is correct. So like right here is the pump feed out to the pump. Make sure this wire's in good health, and make sure that the trigger that triggers the fuel pump right here, the R pump wire right here, make sure it's coming off the harness and it's correct. So this should be ground trigger, and then this is going to send power through this wire to your pump. That is about the normal stuff that kind of plagues people. I mean, every once in a while you'll have an old hot rod pump in your toolbox or something like that, and it's packed it up years ago and you just didn't know it until you're trying to do a thing, and every time you turn the system on, you blow a fuse. Or there's a dead short somewhere, you're routing your wires, or a bad connection or something like that can kind of hang you up. I've had insulated butt connectors corrode over years, and then the diagnostic tree gets amazing and you're like, oh, it's this. So that happens. Issue number 4, coil not firing, no spark, symptoms, RPM shows, but there is no spark. Sometimes what you can run into is the connector has backed out of your coil connector if you're using one of these. So you got to make sure those are clicked in really good. Make sure you have 12 volts on this wire right here. It travels all the way through here, not a big deal, but make sure you have 12 volts here, because these coils, these K coils or what have you, they're actually fired when ground trigger happens. So the ECU will fire this ground trigger, and it makes that spark discharge off the secondary coil into your distributor, which makes power happen and good fun stuff, tire smoke and such. So let's see, if there has been a voltage problem in your system itself, you got to make sure that the coil driver didn't take a hit, the coil driver inside the ECU itself. What happens is somebody will jump start a car, or the coil, they'll use a coil that's got some damage to it or something like that. Or they'll wire it wrong and they'll keep constant power in the wrong areas of the harness itself, which damages the driver inside the ECU, or it could just straight up melt this coil down and create some very hot things happen. And then that's what you get with, like, fuse holders will be melting, connector gets melty, it starts pushing all the insulation out, or it just straight takes your ECU out. That's a handful of common things we see with, just a bit of bad wiring. It's extremely rare to actually have a bad coil out the gate, because these things do go through a test. And the same thing with the driver, it has to fire a coil before it's acceptable to be sold anyway. So it won't just build the thing and then send it to you. It goes through a whole testing procedure. Every one of them does. That's why, if you got something bad out the box, it gets my attention, because it's super rare. I mean, super rare. And we'll take care of you on it. No worries. Let's see. Issue 5, IAC stuck, won't idle, symptom, engine won't idle and surges badly. That's interesting. What happens there with the IAC being stuck? Now, on your first startup, if you haven't turned the key on and off, man, that's cold. This is hot, this is cold. I love that. But so the IAC has a parked position at like 90. Whenever you flip the key on and off, that pintle drives in every time till it zeroes itself, so that it knows where the step position of 90 is. So you turn the key on, it retreats a little bit. You start it up, you have plenty of good airflow for idle, and then it'll adjust itself accordingly, 10 to 20 steps or what have you, not depending on what your engine needs. Now, if it got 90 right here, and you start it up and it goes to 170 something, you need to start looking at stuff like your injector pulse width itself. If you've got too much pulse width, like you've put in the cubic inches wrong, or the fuel pressure is just crazy, or something wild like that, and it's putting a bunch of fuel in there, or your O2 sensor's in a bad spot when it goes into closed loop, it's going to open that IAC all the way up. So it's going to be a low RPM, lots of fuel, really rich, smoke the O2, IAC's going to be just slammed wide open. And then it's like, okay, I should turn off the O2, clear the learn table, and then back some fuel out of the fuel table offset itself to try to remedy what this issue is. On a 4-barrel setup like this, with 4 100-pound-hour each injectors, you're looking at a pulse width, of ejected pulse width, of about 2-ish at idle, that'll get you a good eyeball on it. They may save your O2 sensor if it got washed out with fuel, and then you'll be able to adjust this appropriately. And that's at idle. That's not like the full range, but at idle on your average small block, some big blocks, you're looking at about 2. 2 is good and safe. Mine runs at 1.7. This runs at 1.7, 1.8. The big block I have, I mean, it runs at like 2, 2.1, something like that. So normal stuff. If you got a high IAC value, check your timing. Timing could be off. Check your fuel. You could have too much fuel. Check your O2 sensor. If it's reading crazy and it's putting fuel in, force that thing into open loop. Just go into like tuning, fuel. I think it's under advanced. And you just force it into or turn off learning and turn off loop. That forces it in there. Clear the table. And then look at what the pulse width is. If it's like 4, you go into tuning, fuel, basic, and look at what fuel table offset. If you have a mild motor, if you have a stock motor, what have you not, go in there and take 10% out and see if that condition gets better. If the O2 sensor still ain't reading right, you can get another O2 sensor, and then it got a better chance of actually learning what it should be doing at idle. So when you go to take it for a cruise, it has a better chance of learning. Of course, you'll see some of this in our actual instructional videos, because I made documents on tuning. We're going to make videos to pair with it, just like these diagnostic things, top 5 issues, right? We're going to go, we got 25 more to go just on the Killshot stuff. And it's just normal, basic install and setup stuff. You know, some of this stuff is going to cover like if this fails, if that fails, what's going on, fuel related things and what have you not. But hopefully it helps you guys out. We're trying to put out that good information to help you get your install up and running so you can go burn the tires in the parking lot. Or, I mean, drive the thing, right? So I hope that helps.